Welcome back to Talk Property to Me. My name is Brad East.
I'm Aaron Downie, and today we're going to be talking about Newcastle, which is a big opportunity for buyers in the market moving forward.
Yep, so really unpacking whether we've missed the boat or whether it is the place to invest in 2025.
Throughout the episode, we're going to be talking about specific suburbs, and at the end we'll touch on a few where I recommend buying and I'm certainly buying for clients and where I think will be the biggest growth suburbs for Newcastle over the next decade.
So yeah, stick around to the end and we'll list those suburbs on where to invest. So we'll start off with some of the, historical overview of Newcastle. You know, 30, 40, 50, 60 years even ago, Newcastle was always a very industrial town. It had the BHP, even in World War II, it was one of the major manufacturing facilities for war needs.
Yeah.
So it has got, a reputation of being called Steel City, but that has changed a lot over the years.
I think that the whole Newcastle area itself is gentrified, and people invest in areas for gentrification. But like you said, through the early 1900s and up until World War, even post World War II, it's really been an industrial town, heavily reliant on the mining industry and then, of course, the Port of Newcastle. But that's changed significantly over the past decade, but even more so over the past 30 years progressively.
We're looking even early 2000s, there was no Honeysuckle precinct. There
Not
was
at all.
Hunter Street Mall, all of that was quite derelict. And
But the port was actually Honeysuckle precinct.
Correct,
In the past, yeah.
Yeah, I remember I used to drive through it and it was just, literally an industrial port.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll run through the last few decades and, everything has been growing, and do you see that continuing?
100%. I've put this historical stuff in here because a lot of people say that, Newcastle's had some outstanding growth over the past decade and can it sustain that growth? But in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, up until now, it's essentially been a repeat of itself. Early 2000s was a steady property market, but then low interest rates started driving that market. And it was a more affordable alternative for first home buyers and it was attracting people from Sydney. That was early 2000s and that's exactly what happened over the last decade as well. During the mid 2000s with the coal mining boom, of course, economic activity, increased demand for housing.
Because of employment.
And then, of course, that fed infrastructure and redevelopment of a lot of these places like Honeysuckle Precinct and the light rail and stuff like that. All of these things that happened in the early 2000s happened the last decade as well. And it's essentially just repeating itself over and over again and going through that ebb and flow of the cycles.
So then we had the GFC in 2008, 2009. That obviously did decrease buyer confidence and slow down some things, but then there was also rate cuts and stimulus on the back of that, which did spark that market. I think it rebounded, quite dramatically in the years after 2010, 2011.
Yeah.
So the biggest one, that I can see in this overview is the revitalization of some of these waterfront areres. So the Honeysuckle, I mentioned it earlier, Honeysuckle area, even the university has moved into Honeysuckle. All of these big businesses are now investing in the waterfront sort of area of Newcastle.
Yeah.
And it's really changed all of Newcastle.
And that's the thing, 2010s, you've got student accommodation improving the rail network and, accessibility to that Newcastle University. That was out in the mid-ring suburbs of Newcastle. And that's why we saw, Jesmond and those surrounding suburbs be highly dominant with student accommodation and get, up to 10% rental returns on some of the properties there. Because it was just room sharing with the student accommodation. But over the past decade, those universities have now been built in the CBD and student accommodation is coming out and being built here now in the CBD. So we're essentially seeing what we saw in the early 2000s happen all over again, but on a bigger scale, I think.
And not as reliant on coal.
Not as reliant on coal at all. And that's one of the things that we talk about in here with the improvement for the port and the clean energy precinct.
Well, you look at also some of the big businesses that are investing in putting their offices in Newcastle. You've got QBE, you've got a few big names that are putting their offices, moving them up here.
Yeah.
It's cheaper than, Sydney CBD. It's more affordable for their staff to get housing.
Yeah.
That's what starts to happen. We're not that far from Sydney in Newcastle.
Even satellite offices.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. So then we had the GFC, not GFC, we've done that one. COVID, another crisis. So that actually did the flip of what most people predicted at the start of COVID.
Yeah.
They were predicting 20% reduction in house prices. In Newcastle, it actually went the other way and quite dramatically because of remote work. People could work from home. All those things sort of come into it. And it was just a nicer place to be than Sydney.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, we did see that migration of people from Sydney or other major, more expensive cities, but we also saw a migration from overseas as well during that period because of the university redevelopment. So we had a lot of international students coming to Newcastle during that time as well. But in that COVID period, with attracting more out of town people because it's affordability and it's lifestyle amenities, that's exactly what happened in the early 2000s.
Yeah,
more affordable location for Sydney and first home buyers and investors.
So then we fast forward to now, and obviously we've got really high interest rates. In my opinion, the market has cooled down a lot. The days on market have increased in Newcastle, and things are, it's more of a buyer's market at the moment.
Yeah.
Where do you see things going in the next, or even next year, 2025?
2025 is going to be a hot market. But touching on the buyer's market at the moment, it's a really interesting market. It's a buyer's market, definitely, but it's one or the other. You've either got properties trading within the first week after the first open home, or properties sitting on the market.
Is it still sort of that sub $1 million and above million?
There's a lot of competition for sub 1 million because investors are returned. Downsizers are still in that market. Families are, and most definitely first home buyers. We're finding those properties take a lot longer to trade because that market are not really familiar with things, and they're taking a lot longer to transact because they're more reliant on market conditions. And most definitely interest rates. We're seeing properties, a lot of competition sub 1 mil, but a lot of people transacting quickly on more expensive properties if it's a good purchase. So for some properties, you go one open home, multiple offers after that one open home, and they're selling within the week. Other properties might sit there for 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting market. It's definitely a buyer's market, but it's sort of 50-50. Stuff still trading really quickly.
As soon as borrowing capacities start to increase, that sub 1 million will start to creep up as well.
Yeah.
All of a sudden it's sub 1.2.
Yeah.
We've seen it during COVID when interest rates went down, borrowing capacities went up, purchase prices went up, created more competition.
And when we look at the statistics at the moment, we're talking most suburbs in Newcastle at the moment, although people, it's a buyer's market and things are taking longer to trade, we're still seeing most suburbs grow at about 0.2 to 0.4% per month.
Yep.
Which is pretty strong growth.
Oh, in any market it is. So some of the big things that drive property prices, one of the big things is population growth, and the other one is infrastructure and investment, which also drives employment. So when we look at, what's this, a 20-year forecast?
Yeah, 20-year forecast, so up to, I think it was 2046.
Yeah, so 22
21
years.
years, yeah.
So it's saying that over that period, it's going to have a population growth of around 21%, so about 1% per annum.
Yeah.
How does that stack up to other markets? Or even
other
Newcastle?
So for the New South Wales state population, they're going to average around 0.93%. So it's above the average growth for the state. But in terms of how it stacks up comparable to other markets, when you're talking about more regional markets will grow at about 0.5% depending on the location.
Yep.
It's got a bigger forecast for population growth than places like Sydney because of the affordability issues. But then you've got markets like the whole Maitland region, which is forecasted to grow at 2.9% per annum.
That's mental out there at the moment.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Maitland's definitely another market to talk about because it's first home buyers and investors. But when we talk about that 1% forecast per year increase until 2046, Newcastle had outstanding growth over the past 2 decades, and it still wasn't averaging that 1% per annum. Some years it was doing 1.3%, but other years we were doing 0.6%. So we still had outstanding growth without the population that we're going to have over the decade to come.
So then you look at infrastructure and investment, and this is a big one for Newcastle. There is a lot of spending happening at the moment in Newcastle.
It's a crazy amount of money.
So I'm actually at the Newcastle Airport tomorrow, but that's $55 million of upgrades to go into Newcastle. That's to allow for larger aircraft to come into Newcastle, and that's going to then allow for international flights.
So for anyone who hasn't come across this online, up until recently, Newcastle has just been domestic flights, mostly to Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney,
Gold Coast,
Byron Bay, and some other small regional locations. It's now going international and will allow another, I think it was 850,000 passengers into Newcastle to boost tourism each year.
Yeah, it's expected to create another 4,400 jobs and inject $12.7 billion into the economy over 20 years.
Yeah.
That's mental.
That's pretty big.
And when you look at places where people want to live, they want to live near airports.
Yeah.
They want to be able to travel. Yeah, they want to be able to travel. And by creating Newcastle as an international hub, it opens the door to a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think they're looking. I think one of the first one's going to be New Zealand, and I think they're even thinking Bali and Thailand.
Well, not surprising.
Yeah, that's a major investment in Newcastle.
Even for international migration, like 2021, we saw 7,000 people internationally move to Newcastle.
Yeah.
Imagine what that's going to do when you see an international airport start popping up.
Well, it's easy for them to travel home to see their family.
Yeah.
They don't have to travel 3 hours to Sydney.
And most of it's for the university.
Yeah. And you think about it, as soon as they open it up in Newcastle, everyone's going to travel out of Newcastle.
Yeah.
I hate going to Sydney to
Most
catch
people jump on the train to go to the Sydney airport. That's going to change with the Western Sydney airport being built as well.
Yeah.
But most people living in Newcastle now, we're probably even going to capture some of the Central Coast.
Oh, for sure.
We'll be comparing the markets.
It's easier to park. It's easier to get to. It's not as overwhelming.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. You've also got the major extension of the M1. So M1 is the highway that travels from Sydney to Newcastle to Beresfield, I think it is.
Yeah.
That, if you've ever travelled that, it ends at Beresfield and you sort of go through that through Hexham and you go over the bridge and then through Raymond Terrace.
Yeah.
It is an absolute nightmare in holidays and basically any time other than, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
So that is a $2.1 billion investment, which is 31 kilometres of new motorway, including a 15-kilometre bypass of the congested areas, which is the Hexham and Raymond Terrace.
Yeah.
Again, massive investment into the area. It's going to have around 2,700 construction jobs and boost regional accessibility.
Yeah. And when you think about that, like $2.1 billion invested into that motorway, you've then got close to 3,000 just construction jobs.
Yep.
And then what other jobs come off the back of that as well. But from those construction jobs, you've got increased wages, you've got more taxes flowing into that economy, which then flows into more investment and just the overall economic activity. But in terms of what effect that will have for that motorway, so like we were just saying with capturing some people from the Central Coast, Raymond Terrace is going to be the last stop on the motorway.
Yep.
And Raymond Terrace is the closest suburb to the new international airport in Newcastle.
Yeah.
So at the moment for Raymond Terrace, and I haven't highlighted Raymond Terrace as a place to buy in here, but you can still buy a 3-bedroom house in Raymond Terrace right now for $600,000.
Yeah, it's going to get mental.
In the next 4 years, it's going to be the last stop on the M1 motorway.
Yeah.
It's going to be closer to Sydney. It's going to be quicker to drive to Sydney from Raymond Terrace than it is from Newcastle.
Yeah, it's going to be straight through.
Yeah.
So that's obviously a big one. Port of Newcastle, they're developing a clean energy precinct and they're investing $3 billion into a hydrogen hub.
Yeah.
So we know that some of the car manufacturers at the moment, they're all sort of starting to lean towards hydrogen now over electricity. So this is going to be a massive thing again for Newcastle. 5,000 jobs, injects billions into the local economy, and it will attract global energy partnerships. So again, another big thing. And I believe recently approval also came through for Newcastle Port to create a container hub as well.
Yeah. They're redeveloping that whole area.
Yeah.
So Mayfield, I think it was Mayfield West, just as you go over Kooragang Island to get to Stockton Bridge, all of that land is being rezoned, which will then allow for that clean energy precinct to go in. They're going to start taking more ships through that area as well.
Yeah.
But for this clean energy precinct, we're talking hydrogen hubs in the likes of Muswellbrook, Singleton, Kurri, which will be a whole network for the whole Hunter Valley, Maitland, Newcastle region.
Yeah.
So that's $3 billion investment just for hydrogen, and there'll be a lot of exports coming out of Newcastle.
Yeah, and you think of the about the crazy amount of containers that are leaving Sydney Port and coming to Newcastle. It makes absolute sense to create that in Newcastle instead.
And that Port of Newcastle, that's an extra 5,000 jobs.
Yeah.
So, when you're talking about...
They're going to need houses.
When you're talking about all of this infrastructure with the airport, the Motorway Extension, the Port of Newcastle Extension, that's a massive amount of jobs for the local economy.
Yeah. Then you look at John Hunter Hospital. So if you're not familiar with John Hunter Hospital, it already is one of the best hospitals in the world.
One of the biggest in Australia.
One of the biggest in Australia, but it is also having some major investment at the moment, $780 million to be precise. So it's going to increase.
That'll be blown out over a bill.
Oh, yeah. Government contract. It'll be $1.5 billion.
Yeah.
But it's also, they've also created an inner city bypass that's going to sort of bypass and make it easier to get to that hospital as well from certain areas.
Yeah.
Again, huge amount of jobs creating those things. It's going to attract people to live in this area because of the high quality healthcare you get in this area as well.
Yeah.
I personally know someone that has moved to Newcastle because their wife is undergoing treatment and needed to live in Newcastle for that treatment to happen at John Hunter. So there is a lot of reasons why people would live in Newcastle just for the hospital.
Yeah, for the medical care. 100%. And we know we've got an ageing population. Most of them want accessibility to good medical care. And aside from the patients, when you've got such a significant redevelopment, you're going to have staff at that hospital, and who are the staff that you need? You need doctors and nurses and specialists. And who has the money?
And we'll talk about shortly where they live.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So university expansion as well. Again, I mentioned it earlier that they've opened up the new campus in Honeysuckle, so right in the city, right on the waterfront actually.
Yeah.
Beautiful location. There's another one on Hunter Street as well. The university is really investing in Newcastle, and that is also obviously going to drive immigration, for student visas. And again, they're going to need accommodation.
Yeah.
East end of Newcastle, this has been a massive one as well.
This is big.
Yeah, so it's a $1 billion investment from Iris Capital to create 500 new apartments and retail spaces. Now, if you've been through there recently, it doesn't look anything like it did 10 years ago.
No. 10 years ago, maybe it was more than 10 years ago, the old David Jones building was in there.
Yeah.
But Newcastle, that whole Hunter Street Mall area was just dilapidated. It was filthy to walk through.
It was actually scary walking through there at night.
Oh, I remember working on there, and you'd stand out the front and you'd get abused by some of the junkies walking through there.
Yeah, the crackheads wanting a cigarette or something.
Yeah, but for that whole Iris Capital $1 billion redevelopment, we're talking the QT hotels, multiple apartment blocks, the new Woolworths Metro, banks have gone in there, new cafes, restaurants.
Yeah, and they're not finished. There's a lot to go.
Finished, yeah.
There's a lot to go. So that's going to be, it's called the East End. They're calling it East End, but it is going to be, it's really going to open up a whole new area, which hasn't been used in 20 years.
And we saw that highlighted. So Newcastle East is forecasted to have, for that 1% average population increase for Newcastle, 3.6% of it is going to that Newcastle East area, to all of those apartments.
Yeah, it's mental. So Honeysuckle, over $1 billion invested in that area. Wasn't in former industrial land. It was a port, part of the Newcastle port.
Yeah.
I think Honeysuckle Hotel and the one further up were actually old wool sheds.
Yeah.
So they've really redeveloped that area, and again, it is a booming local area there. Yeah. Lots of bars, restaurants, accommodation.
You're talking, the water facing 3-4 bedroom units. They're already trading at around $4 million.
Yeah. But
you talk about those new ones that are going up at the East End. You've got Wharf Views, you've got Newcastle Beach or Nobby's Water Views. You're talking about $10 million apartments.
And that when we think back even 15 years ago, 10 years ago, Newcastle wasn't a big tourist location.
No.
You didn't think of going on a holiday to Newcastle. Well, no. I didn't, I live here, but most people didn't. No. And now the tourism in Newcastle is quite high.
Yeah.
Because we've got these areas like the East End, Honeysuckle, all these nice areas. We're close to Hunter Valley, which is arguably one of the best wine regions in Australia. So there is a lot of good things happening in Newcastle, which I guess if we were to summarise and say, is it a place to invest? Yes, 100%.
100%. I'm going to list some top suburbs now, and I'm not listing any of the metrics that support this information, but the top suburbs that I've listed here, we can track this with 10 different supply and demand metrics, and we're looking at household incomes for the area. We're looking at interest rates compared to house prices. We're looking at socioeconomic profiles. We're looking at multiple different metrics to track this stuff. And when we're tracking the 15,000 different suburbs across Australia, these suburbs rank in the top 1% of suburbs to buy in. Yep. We're talking as a percentage out of 100, these top suburbs are ranking the top 90% out of 100.
Yeah, so they're going to do well.
They're going to do really well.
Simple as that. So we look at the first two, New Lambton Heights, or New Lambton Heights. New Lambton Heights, that's where a lot of the doctors are living.
And Rankin Park as well. So that whole mid-ring suburb around John Hunter Hospital.
Yeah.
We're talking, for people who don't know Newcastle, like we just said, $10 million beachfront apartments. And, if you're buying in those premium locations of Hamilton South, you're talking about a full family house for $3-4 million. When you're getting out into that New Lambton Heights, New Lambton area, there's a lot of wealth and affluence in that location, and house prices are still trading around the $1 million mark.
Yeah.
I think the typical price point for Rankin Park was $870. So we're talking about first home buyer and investment territory there.
And it's still so close to that ring.
Yeah. So there's going to be a lot of money going into those suburbs with that hospital redevelopment, and of course that bypass for the New Lambton Road bypass. But when you're talking about family homes, some of the houses still trade in New Lambton homes for $4 million.
Yeah.
I think Chase sold one rather recently for $4.4 million.
And they're massive blocks.
Massive blocks.
You can picture them. They're the older style houses with the hedges and the nice sort of stone.
I was talking to a client, bought a property there recently for a client, and was saying it's very similar to the St Ives, Turramurra
Oh, 100%.
sort of areas.
Yeah.
You know, jacarandas lining the streets and really nice manicured lawns.
Big head, yeah, the really nice manicured gardens and a lot of care in that area for the appearance.
Yeah. So for top suburb, New Lambton Heights, Rankin Park, that whole inner city hub, when you look at the incomes for that compared to house prices and the different supply and demand metrics, it is crazy when you compare that to other markets across Australia.
Yeah, and then further in the city, we've got Tighes Hill and Mayfield East.
Yeah.
So they're obviously areas that are quite close to the city. Tighes Hill is going through that gentrification sort of.
Yeah.
Same with Mayfield East.
And that's just proximity to the city.
Yeah. You know, 20 years ago, you would never have imagined wanting to buy in Tighes Hill or Islington or Mayfield East.
Yeah.
And now it is the place to buy.
It's a really it's a really good little area, different sort of pocket for, like, when you look at Charlestown and Cahibee, you're more so that coastal sort of beach style location.
Correct. Families, young families.
Yeah.
The Tighes Hill Mayfield East is, I don't really like saying it, but more the hipster sort of
it's like a grungy sort of feel, but it's
correct.
got a lot of money in that location still.
Oh, 100%.
You're talking, 3 to 4 bedroom houses for $1 million.
Yeah.
So we're going to see those suburbs grow, and same with Cahibee and Charlestown. They're both coastal locations,
close to the beach.
very different to Mayfield and Tighes Hill, and very similar to each other with Cahibee and Charlestown.
Yeah, Charlestown's good. It's right in the middle of almost Newcastle and Lake Macquarie, so it's very central.
Yeah.
Very easy to get everywhere.
And I've mentioned these as top suburbs, but it's really important that regardless of the suburbs, we've spoken about it before, it's so important to be very situational with personal circumstances.
Yeah.
Because this is just the top suburbs, broadly speaking. If you buy a shit house in one of these locations, you're going to do bad.
Yeah, there's still cracked ends in these locations.
So
you need to know the locations within the location.
Yeah, it's property type and it's different strategies. Like that, I think one of the Bell property real estate agents listed a place recently in Charlestown. There was a 4-bedroom standard brick unrenovated house, and it's going to go for $1 mil to 1.1 mil.
Yeah.
And then there's a 4-bedroom house that's been completely renovated and a nice renovation on it. That'll go for close to 2, if not 2. We're talking about $1 million difference just from a renovation.
Yeah.
So from people who have the capacity to put money into it and redevelop something like that, a flip in these locations are going to do well.
Yeah.
So it depends on the strategy for people, but overall,
flipping needs to be done in areas where people can afford to purchase it with the renovation done.
If you're talking about New Lambton Heights, if you buy one of the really grand brick homes with nice manicured lawns in that New Lambton Heights, if you sell it to a doctor or a surgeon for a completed product, they're going to pay the money for it.
100%, because they don't have the time.
They don't have the time to do it themselves. They want a completed product.
Never met a doctor that will get out there and do their own gardens and wash their car and all these things. They're too busy.
Yeah.
Literally, if they've got spare time, they're not going to be spending it renovating a house. So
aside from that, like, we know that we've got an aging population, and even second to that, families. Families are too busy. They want completed products.
That could be a future episode, is property flipping.
Yeah.
But if you do want us to talk about any certain regions, areas, cities, throw it in the comments in YouTube or send us an email or reach out to us on our social profiles.
Yeah.
It won't be hard to find us. We've also got a website which you can fill out a form on there as well, and it'll come directly through to us. If you are looking to buy in Newcastle, Aaron is a local Newcastle expert as far as where to buy certain streets. Reach out to Aaron at mackenziepropertygroup.com.au, and he'll be able to point you in the right direction and start that conversation.
Maybe Melbourne for the next episode.
Maybe. No worries. Well, thanks for watching, and we'll see everyone on the next one.
See you on the next one.